Welcome to the Bible Forum. This is the last Sunday in May 2020. I want to talk to you about 1968. Some of you weren't alive in 1968, but you've seen the demonstrations, so-called, in Minneapolis and now around the country, including our beautiful Charleston, South Carolina, that was desecrated today. A black man was killed by the police in Minneapolis. So that means people of color and others are justified in rioting, doing battle with the police, and burning down other people's businesses and homes. And all that makes perfect sense to some. That it seems barbaric to you simply means you don't understand the plight of black people in America. Demonstrators demanding justice burned the Minneapolis police station and took control of the streets in and around the area, heaving wood onto the flames, kicking down poles with surveillance cameras, and torching surrounding stores. And every night since, this scenario has been repeated. Now, it's growing throughout the nation. Is this spontaneous? No. It is now the required response. And statistics show it's being choreographed by radicals and groups determined to undermine our democracy for their own purposes. The crowd was protesting the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man whose life was snuffed out Tuesday by white Minneapolis police officers, one of which kneeled on his neck for about 8 minutes. 4 officers have been fired. 1 has been charged with third-degree murder. Preliminary findings from the medical examiner's autopsy were included in the charges made Friday against Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who arrested Floyd and kneeled on his neck before he died Monday evening. The autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Police had arrested Floyd and were trying to put him in a squad car when he stiffened up, fell to the ground, saying he was claustrophobic, according to the complaint. An official autopsy revealed nothing to support the strangulation as cause of death, concluding that the combined effects of being restrained, potential intoxicants in Floyd's system, and his underlying health issues, including heart disease, likely contributed to the death. The finding does not exonerate the 4 police officers, as prolonged pressure on the critical arteries and veins in the neck could well have caused heart trauma. Indeed, the report notes that the officers' actions in restraining Floyd likely contributed to his death. The report said that Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system seemed likely to have contributed to his death. Now, we're not allowed to say that if this man had surrendered peacefully, none of this would have happened. We can't say that because the reaction by the police resulted in his death. We're not to assume that Mr. Floyd never rides in automobiles since he's claustrophobic, or to suggest his violent antics required 4 officers to restrain him, meaning they were not being gentle. Mark Claxton of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance said on MSNBC that the actions of the mob were an effort to force the world to listen to the cries of a community that feels under siege, that black men and women are threatened by law enforcement on a daily basis. Is any of that true? Do you know of a community under siege? Black men and women threatened by law enforcement on a daily basis? Walking down the street, minding their own business, threatened. Do you feel threatened? Do you live with that kind of threat hanging over your head? And if not, why not? Why don't you feel this way about the police? Well, the stock answer is you're not black. Or perhaps you aren't pushing to be able to act any way you want regardless of other people's rights or livelihoods. Like businessmen and women trying to make a living in your neighborhood, the neighborhood you're trying to burn down. Like families trying to raise their children in your neighborhood, the neighborhood in which your children now cannot play. Like a city trying to accommodate every citizen, not just a few. So what happened? Well, for hours, no firefighters or police officers were seen anywhere around the protest. TV reporters on the scene said they heard no sirens, just honking of horns by demonstrators. People threw fireworks at the flaming precinct, and the crowd cheered. A liquor store was engulfed, and CNN reported that a smoke shop and a Target department store had also been torched. This scenario was then repeated in just about every major city in America, and it will continue until people get tired of doing it. This is the way to make progress in your community. Tear it up, burn it down, rob the stores, destroy the property. They'll just come back and spend millions of dollars to rebuild. Do you really think Target's going to rebuild in that area? Or any other significant business? Explaining the officers' retreat, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey told a news conference at 1:30 a.m. local time. As situations started to escalate more and more, as we saw more and more people breach the perimeter, it became obvious to me that safety was at risk. Brick and mortar is not as important as life. They just walked away and let the mob have at it. An Arby's boarded up for protection was broken into. A dozen people swarmed the entrance, according to MSNBC's Morgan Chesky. Swarmed the entrance is code for looting. That'll encourage Arby's to come back. The reporter said that is really the scene, block by block, in this part of the city. Now, in context, you have Eddie Glaude, chair of Princeton's Department of African American Studies, who said the violence reflected distrust of government and police as the nation copes with a pandemic that has brought massive unemployment and loss of life. He went on to say we're on the cusp of a kind of desperation in this country. So, it's not emotions running wild. It's not selfish, larcenous mindset or character. It's the desperation in this country because of a disease. Well, what was it in 1960s? In the 1960s, people took to the streets and tried to burn down cities. There was no coronavirus. Oh, that's right, it was Vietnam. Oh, the war? No. The idea that young men were being drafted and sent over there to fight and die. The bottom line? Former NAACP President Ben Jealous said on MSNBC, quote, "This is what it looks like when justice has been denied for a long time." End of quote. Professor Glaude chimed in, quote, "Violence reflected distrust of government and police as the nation copes with a pandemic that has brought massive unemployment and loss of life." End of quote. Interpretation? None of this is the fault of those who are out of control. Those who are breaking the law, destroying other people's properties, stealing, grand theft in some cases. It's all about something, someone else. The coronavirus. Anything, anyone is responsible except me. Well, that's what 3-year-olds say when they get caught. As long as our leaders, primarily in government and higher education, keep fueling this sort of irresponsible attitude, people will continue destroying both their lives and the livelihood of others. Oh yeah, our education system, our psychological system, and even our churches are painting a picture of life that isn't real. You see, real is accepting responsibility for your actions. Accepting personal responsibility for your future. And that's not happening today in far too many homes and schools. People of character take their difficult situations and they do whatever it takes to fix it. What happens when that isn't how people think? Then irresponsibility and selfism grows into a monster no one can control, and it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Minnesota Mayor Melvin Carter said, quote, "Every single person we arrested last night, I'm told, was from out of state. What we are seeing right now is a group of people who are not from here. And what does any of this have to do with Charleston, South Carolina, where looters started fires and destroyed businesses today and yesterday?" Oh, and Secretary of State Bill Barr weighed in. He said, quote, "In many places it appears the violence is planned, organized, driven by anarchistic and far-left extremists using Antifa-like tactics, many of whom travel from out of state to promote just this kind of violence." 1968. We haven't moved an inch.